Thanks for making it down here today, despite the flash flood warning, which actually closed ACL. So hope we all get out of here okay. I want to give you a couple of statistics that aren't necessarily related, but they're interesting to consider side by side. One of them was that there was a Pew poll that revealed that the number of Americans who did not identify with any religion is growing really fast. 6 years ago, 15% of Americans said that they were religiously unaffiliated. Last year, it was 20%. So that's, a third higher over just 5 years. That's 1/5 of adults who say that they have no religious affiliation. And for adults under 30, it's a third. And my other statistic is that as of June 2012, 72% of all households have broadband internet connections. 2013. Now, I'm sure that neither of these facts is really a huge surprise to anybody in this room. Most of you probably know how big an impact the internet has on all our day-to-day lives. But I've felt for a really long time that the rise of unbelief in America is largely, it owes a lot to the growth of social media and the internet. And so in this talk, I'm going to talk about exactly how they relate to each other. And I'm going to try to help you hopefully leverage that information to have more effective discussions online. So here's where we're going. First, I'm going to give you a brief and sort of nerdy history of the internet. Then we're going to talk about the impact of the internet on religious discussions. And then we're going to talk about sort of the transition from the old internet to the new internet, which they used to refer to as Web 2.0 when they were really into buzzwords about it. And then we're going to talk about some practical ways to leverage this information for you to use. And then I'm going to give some kind of warnings about why you should be a little cautious around social media. So to start with, first of all, I don't think I could get away with giving a lecture on the internet to a general audience like you if this were 20 years ago. When I was an undergraduate at the University of California in San Diego, I used to listen to this morning radio show called Dave Shelley and Chainsaw. I actually did a little of the original content for their first web page. And one morning I was listening to the show, and Dave, a very interesting and witty radio host, they were all talking about what to do about sitting on an airplane and having a boring person who wants to talk to you next to you. And Dave says, I have a really easy solution that I use. Somebody asks me, what do you do? And I say, computers. And he said, that shuts him right up. That was 20 years ago. Now, how many of you guys have a computer at home? Like, does anybody not have a computer at home? Does anybody not have a broadband connection at home, like I just said a minute ago? Okay, so I believe that's absolutely everybody has both a computer and a broadband connection. So I have earned the right to let my nerd freak flag fly right now. So I want to talk a little bit about where the internet has been, and I'm trying hard not to sound too much like Grandpa Simpson. Back in those days, we used a browser that was called NCSA Mosaic, and it ran on Unix systems with modems that downloaded 14.4 kilobits per second. So this is a map of the internet, the year that I was born. This is 1974. And as you can see, like, each one of these is a computer. This is all there is to it. There are less than 50 right here, and a lot of them are names of universities, because that's where the academic internet lived. Over here somewhere, here's my alma mater, UCSD. And let's see. So in 1974, you could log on to one of the systems here, one of these terminals, and read a handful of online papers and exchange messages, and that was about all you could do. In fact, in 1982, 8 years later, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology came out with a handbook on network etiquette, and here's what it says. In one section it says, it is considered illegal to use the ARPANET, which was the internet back then, for anything which is not in direct support of government business. Personal messages to other ARPANET subscribers, for example, to arrange a get-together or check and say a friendly hello, are generally not considered harmful. Sending electronic mail over the ARPANET for commercial profit or political purposes is both antisocial and illegal. By sending such messages, you can offend many people, and it is possible to get MIT in serious trouble with the government agencies which manage the ARPANET. You can see how much trouble Barack Obama would have been back then, because I know most of you get his email that has some political promotion in it. I mean, even Amazon.com, they send you emails all the time. They make a little bit of profit, so I heard. So that was the state of the internet in the 80s, and it took more than 10 years after that for the Pew Research Center to actually get around to taking some surveys of how many households had internet access. Now, I started college right over here. They didn't even measure it yet. It wasn't worth measuring because almost nobody had heard of it, and then the year they started measuring it, 1995, I was, in my third year of college. I started out as a physics major, but then got convinced by a roommate, there was a little friendly in-dorm game creation competition of sorts. And so we all made some DOS-based games, and I switched from physics to computer science because it was really cool, but it took a while for the internet to catch on even then. There was this computer lab at UCSD. And here in 1995, the computer lab was mostly the domain of the hardcore geeks like me. I mean, you could go in anytime, you could get a Unix terminal, just sit down whenever you wanted to, unless it was the night before a big project, and then it was kind of streaming with people trying to get in their stuff by midnight. The walls in that computer lab were covered with dot matrix printouts that had things like the Star Trek Next Generation drinking game rules, jokes about Unix administrators, haha. But as the web browsers got more popular, I gradually saw more and more students not doing work, but goofing around in the lab. They were looking at their entertainment pages and sometimes porn in public. And there was no such thing as a high-speed internet connection anywhere in the dorms, definitely. I really noticed the turning point by the time I was getting ready to graduate. In 1997, I had some theater classes because I had to fill some time. I almost had all my requirements out of the way. And there were young theater majors who had email addresses. And 1997, right here, what is this? Getting up to 30%, but I was surprised. So now you get all the way to 2011, which is as far as this graph goes, and we're pushing up on 80% at that point. It's a couple years later now, so it's probably a couple points higher already. And like I said, now, 72% of people not only have internet connections, but actual broadband. So obviously, the internet has dramatically changed the way that we think about things. In 1997, I went to a conference on computer graphics, and I had the good fortune to hear a guy named Bran Farron give the keynote address. He, at the time, was the president of the company that designs Disney theme park rides. And he asked the audience whether they thought that the internet was a passing craze like CB radio. And he said, and a lot of people really did, and he said, you're all wrong. As inventions go, it's not CB radio, it's fire. Here's what the internet has done for us. It's given us a giant repository of all human knowledge. I mean, it's put information about millions of topics just a few keystrokes away at all times. Wikipedia alone, which is not the internet, but which is not the whole internet, but sometimes it seems like it, they have 31 million articles. Among those articles, the top 5,000 articles all get accessed at least 20,000 times a week. So the 5,000th most popular Wikipedia article gets about 20,000 hits a week, and then it goes up from there. So when it comes to questions of pure factual information, one of the things is I never have to argue with anybody about factual information, because if I want to say, like, who played the bad guy in Monsters, Inc. and what else has he been in, nobody has to sit around and think about it. They just pull out their phone and they pull up the IMDb app, and I bet some of you have already got it. It was Steve Buscemi. And if my son asks, like, why do trucks use diesel fuel instead of regular fuel, I don't really know. I'm not a car guy. But I actually can punch in natural language. This is a Star Trek communicator I've got right here. I just go, computer, why do trucks use diesel fuel? And somebody, somewhere, has written a really well-worded, concise article that has been voted up by lots of internet users, and they give the concise explanation that I need to explain this answer to an 11-year-old. And I can't overstate how amazing that is. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. It's a really popular book. It's actually about a fictional book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which he imagined as the ultimate reference guide to everything in civilization. But Douglas Adams' idea fell short, because if The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was as good as the internet, the entry on Earth would never have been reduced down to mostly harmless, because there would be thousands of very special interest Earth geeks who were filling in that information all the time. But the internet isn't just a static dumping ground for information. It's also given us sort of a limited form of telepathy. Before the telegraph was invented, it could take months for a handwritten letter to reach somebody across the country. Today, you can dash an email or send a text message, and it'll show up in a few seconds to anywhere in the world immediately. In 1970, there was a TV advertisement for a telephone company bragging that you could make a long-distance phone call for as little as 70 cents a minute. You know how I know that? I saw the commercial on YouTube. Today you can do live video calls over Skype or Google Hangouts, and it's virtually free because it's just already built into the broadband internet that 72% of people have. So I know we haven't achieved everything from the Jetsons yet. I mean, I'd like some flying cars. I'd even settle for a hoverboard. But come on, we have free video calls all the time. Isn't anybody impressed by that? And your messages, here's the thing, they're not just limited to just one person at a time. By taking advantage of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, message boards, blogs, the comment section of popular articles, you can not only make a call to your friends and family, but you can also broadcast a message to hundreds, thousands, millions with practically no extra effort. All right, so that does it for the initial history of the internet. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the impact that the internet has on discussions about atheism. This past July, the New York Times ran a story that was titled, "Some Mormons Search the Web and Find Doubt." I think that headline is putting it mildly. Let me read an excerpt to you. When fellow believers in Sweden began coming to Mormon elder Hans Mattsson with information from the internet that contradicted the church's history and teachings, he dismissed it as anti-Mormon propaganda, the whisperings of Lucifer. He asked his superiors for help in responding to the members' doubts, and when they seemed to only sidestep the questions, Mr. Mattsson began his own investigation. But when he discovered credible evidence that the church founder, Joseph Smith, was a polygamist, he didn't know that, and that the Book of Mormon and other scriptures were rife with historical anomalies, Mr. Mattsson said he felt that the foundation on which he had built his life began to crumble. Around the world and in the United States, where the faith was founded, the Mormon Church is grappling with a wave of doubt and disillusionment among members who encountered information on the internet that sabotaged what they thought about their faith, according to interviews with dozens of Mormons and those who study the church. And here's a quote from Mattsson. I feel like I had an earthquake under my feet. Everything I'd been taught, everything I'd been proud to preach about and witness about just crumbled under my feet. It was such a terrible psychological and nearly physical disturbance. Mr. Mattsson's decision to go public with his disaffection in a church whose top leaders commonly deliberate in private is a sign that the church faces serious challenges, not just from outside, but also now from skeptics inside. It's kind of tough to live in a culture that doesn't take your religion seriously. And as a side note, 2 nights ago, Linnea and I saw Book of Mormon, which was hilarious and has won a Tony Award, and I'm sure that hasn't helped. Let's see. So I would bet that the show is also making Mormons run into a few ideas that they wouldn't normally have thought of. So, we're talking about Mormons now, but I promise I can find another example from every major religion, like this one from Slate. Once upon a time, a Hasidic Jew looking for escape might have gone to the library, but F. Wiesel discovered her public library existed at around the same time that she also discovered the internet. Wiesel started going online when she was 19 on her husband's laptop. Within 2 years, she began exploring blogs by people who had left Hasidism, and she had a huge realization. She wasn't the only Hasidic Jew questioning what she now calls a lifetime of indoctrination and being taught not to think. When she set up an anonymous Facebook account, her profile picture was a painting of Eve in the Garden of Eden. I don't know if it was that one, but that's a good one. That is also not a G-rated one if I had showed you the whole thing. Implying that the internet had become her tree of knowledge. In time, Wiesel became so rebellious, she asked to stop shaving the hair she covered with a scarf, flouting the standards for married women in her community, that she says she was asked by community leaders to hand over the laptop, but it was too late. There's Mormons and Jews. You can find similar stories if you Google them for Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, Catholics, Baptists, fundamentalists, you name it. This problem is actually so bad that it's regularly acknowledged now by professional evangelicals like Josh McDowell here, who is the author of Evidence That Demands a Verdict about the definitely true existence and divinity of Jesus Christ. He says, the internet has given atheists, agnostics, skeptics, the people who like to destroy everything that you and I believe, almost equal access to your kids as your youth pastor and you have, whether you like it or not. The abundance of information has led to skepticism, and the internet has leveled the playing field. Here's the bottom line. Evangelicals are really eager to share their view of the world with everyone who will listen. But on some level, shoring up the troops in religion often relies on maintaining ignorance, either intentionally through secrecy or just by living in a place where your views are never challenged. I'm going to come back and justify this claim a little better in a minute, because I don't want to say that all religious people are ignorant. I know some very smart ones. But for now, I'll just say that there are dozens of major religions and hundreds of thousands of subgroups in those major religions, and many of them make claims that are, in fact, mutually contradictory. And as Austin Klein from about.atheism.com put it once, religions can't all be true, but they can all be false. Because there are so many sets of ideas that are accepted with minimal or no evidence, religious people are often pretty adept at tuning out competing information. So here's a typical conversation that I'll have with Christians. They say, you can't expect God to be subject to human logic. You should just have faith like me. And I'll say, well, if I did decide to put faith in something, why would it be your particular brand of religion? Why would it be Christianity at all? Why wouldn't I just start believing in Allah? Or sometimes it's the reverse. When I argue with Muslims, I get kind of a perverse pleasure out of saying, hey, have you ever considered accepting Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? The thing is, respect for faith seems to evaporate the moment you try to bring up any competing religion, and suddenly logic and evidence become really important in justifying competing points of view. I believe it was last week, I was on the Atheist Experience with my wife Linnea, and she told a caller that she had gone back in time and created the universe herself. And then she pressed him to explain why he didn't believe this. And he said, well, I guess I just need some kind of proof to know that I should take your word for it. And we said, exactly! I've found that I can get the very best arguments for debunking non-mainstream religions like Wicca, Mormonism, Scientology by listening to mainstream Christian evangelicals, because they have incredible critical thinking skills, as long as it's not about their own stuff. So this is what the atheist author John Loftus has referred to. He coined this as the outsider test for faith, which is test your beliefs as if you were an outsider in the faith that you are evaluating. However, a lot of religious people never have any reason to consider the outsider test because they never run into any competing religions. If you're born into a religious family, you live in a religious community, you go to church with like-minded people, it's probably a very rare event for you to come into much contact with competing points of view. Or at least it used to be. See, this is where the internet really comes into play, because when 72% of all households have broadband internet, the internet is a fact of life. I mean, every single person in this room has got some internet. If you didn't have access to the internet, I would be surprised. It would be like being 20 years ago saying that your household doesn't have a TV or a phone line. It's just something we all take for granted now, and as I showed you before, it's happened in a very, very short time frame that some of us don't really stop to think about. And because the internet is such an integrated part of all our lives at this point, we don't just have the opportunity to meet lots of people who have different opinions from us, we're more or less forced to in a lot of cases. Sooner or later, if you're dealing with any kind of mix of people, you're going to run into somebody who doesn't agree with you. Like, Americans don't run into only Americans. They run into people from other countries who have other stupid beliefs, or they run into people from one of those evil European countries who, mostly, they have a much higher proportion of atheists there than we do here. And even if you have the good fortune to be raised by atheist parents, which I was, there is no way you're not running into Christianity. There's no way that you're not running into competing views throughout your life, which is why for atheists, what the internet is bringing is kind of familiar and comfortable in a way. It's like, we're already used to constant conflict to begin with. It's those people living in small-town rural America where everybody is the same religion except for one lonely person that the internet starts becoming sort of threatening seeming. Here's some email that we received just last week. And trust me when I say that I could probably find a similar email just about any week I chose to look. It says, I'm 17 years old and I'm an atheist. I became an atheist about a year ago. Before I was an atheist, I was a fundamentalist Christian, and my entire family belongs to this religion. My father is an elder in my church, and my mom is the head of the education ministry. As you can imagine, this is causing some strong tensions in my life. I often get singled out, and ever since I came out as being an atheist, everyone around me who is a Christian has been treating me like I'm some sort of troublemaker, and my sole purpose in life is to make people mad. In America, if you grow up in a Christian household, you're going to run into other Christians. If you stop being a Christian, you're still going to run into other Christians. If you grow up in an atheist household, you're still going to run into Christians. But for ideas that are true, running into competing ideas is an advantage, not a drawback. Earlier, I claimed that religious beliefs tend to rely on sustained ignorance to some extent, so let me go back and try to justify that now. And I'm going to do it by introducing you to a concept that a lot of you have probably heard of, memes. Let's see here. Okay, so a meme... I skipped a page. There we go. The meme was coined by Richard Dawkins in his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. And ordinarily at this point, if I'm giving a talk about atheism and I want to bring up memes, I have to explain what Dawkins really meant. But you know, today we're talking about the internet, so I think it would be more fitting to illustrate them this way. That a lot of you are probably familiar with this particular picture, but what I'm talking about is that a meme on the internet is a discrete chunk of information. Most often it's a picture that gets paired up with some helpful text. And it gets spread around from account to account by being passed along and shared. And sometimes memes live lives of their own, a long life, by getting replicated a lot by a lot of different people for a very long time. Now, this is our good friend Dave Silverman, who is president of American Atheists and recent Bat Cruise attendee. Dave, in 2011, famously went on the O'Reilly Factor with Bill O'Reilly, and Bill O'Reilly, Dave asked if there was any proof of God, and Bill O'Reilly said, "Well, tides go in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that." So Dave made this face. And within days, somebody had taken a still shot of the video and made some nice artwork out of it, because it's really a picture for all occasions, right? The text down here is Dave Silverman's sentiment. What the heck? And that is an emotion that people like to express a lot on the internet. So this has become known as the "Are you serious" meme, and this is a very well-adapted meme for personal survival. The idea of a meme is that it's kind of like a gene. Genes can replicate and create copies of themselves, and if they have traits that are adapted for survival, then they live longer, and there's more of them. And then other memes survive for different reasons. This is one meme, this is one of a series of memes known as Stupid Ned Stark. If any of you are familiar with the popular TV show Game of Thrones, Ned Stark is this very noble, heroic character who goes through a lot of trials, and a lot of viewers have noticed that Ned Stark, while being undeniably noble, is kind of honorable to the point of being a little dumb. So here we have him in a typical conundrum. Littlefinger tells you not to trust him? Trust Littlefinger. This one is very well adapted for survival also, because it is an in-joke that, it doesn't have to reach everybody, but it is something that if you are a Game of Thrones fan, then you really appreciate it. And then some memes are a little less context specific.